Many of the people that reach out to me on this channel are looking to buy multifamily property. This is oftentimes their first time buying a home, and they feel like the process can be so much more complicated than it needs to be, and it's really pretty simple. But in order to successfully buy a multifamily property here in the Houston metro, there's a couple questions that you absolutely have to ask yourself to make sure that you're on your way to the path to success in multifamily properties. And so we're going to break down all the myths, all the things that you don't need to know, and everything that you do need to know to make sure that you do that properly here in Houston. And the first thing that you have to ask yourself is, what type of investor are you going to be? Do you need this property to be more turnkey? Are you hands-on and so you don't mind if it's just busted and disgusted as long as it has the amount of units that you need? Or are you going to be completely hands-off where you buy this thing as a separate investment where you're just basically putting the money up, you have a property manager all set up? How are you going to manage, and what type of investor are you planning to be with this multifamily property? Because depending on what your answer is, all of the options are going to look drastically different in the greater Houston metro. And not only will the options look different, the funding is going to also be different depending on what type of investor you plan on being and the type of property that you plan on buying. Because a 1 to 4 family unit is looked at the same as just a standalone single family unit, you can get into a multifamily property with as little as 3.5% or 3% down, depending on your credit structure. And because the banks look at a duplex, a triplex, or a quad the same as they would look at a single family home, you can use the same financing that you would on a traditional house to buy multifamily. And so if you have the credit to qualify for a 3% down conventional or any of these 0 down conventional products, or if you can qualify for an FHA loan, if it is within your approval budget, you can afford a multifamily property. If you don't plan on living in that property and you don't plan on being a live-in landlord, then the financing is going to be a little bit more traditional, and you're going to need to come with a little bit higher of a down payment. So where you could get in at 5% or under if you were doing a live-in landlord situation, if you're doing straight investment, you're going to likely need to be 20 to 25% down towards that asset. Because you're not living in it and you're not looking at this as your primary residence for the now, the banks are looking at this as strictly an investment, and they want you to have more skin in the game. And so the down payment required to take on that property is going to be much higher. The minimums that I'm seeing right now, somewhere around 20 to 25%, depending on the financing structure and the bank that you're going through. In Texas, if you own a home already and you are looking at a secondary home, I've seen some funding come in where you can get it at 15% down or a little bit lower than the standard bank rates, but it's still going to be a substantially higher chunk of change than that 5% or less if you were doing a live-in landlord type of deal. And so once we have the type of property that you're going to buy and the type of landlord that you're going to be and the funding out of the way, now we have to actually talk about the market. What is multifamily like in Houston? And I get this question so much. I have so many people that reach out to me on this channel, especially from those that are coming from different states looking to relocate to the Houston market. And maybe they're coming from places that have a lot of triplexes and quads and just a different multifamily options. The options in Houston, regardless of this being one of the most populated cities in the US, we don't really have the biggest multifamily market. And that's really shocking to me and a lot of people, because this is one of the biggest cities in the US. And so when people hit me up and they say, hey, what kind of multifamily do you have for me at $500,000? And I point them to usually a duplex, they're like, that's all I can get for $500,000 in Houston? And at that point, that's where we deep dive and go through what the market actually looks like here in the greater Houston metro. Because what you'll see very quickly as we're doing these searches for you is that the vast majority of the options here in Houston are actually duplexes. There's not really many places where you're going to get a triplex or a quad in Houston. It just doesn't come up very often. I'm not sure if that was a code thing that happened. And it seems like most of those houses that are triplexes or quads are either some kind of an old, what looked like mansion that was converted into multiple units, or it was a big house in the front and multiple garage apartments or multiple little side houses that were added to a big plot of land. It's usually never just like a straight up, these are 4 townhomes that are connected. This is the quad, this is what you can buy. It just very rarely happens here in Houston. And so as you're looking around the overall market and you're seeing for anything that's not really just a complete gut job or completely busted, you're going to be somewhere within that $250,000 to $300,000 a unit to get somewhere that is either remotely pretty or remotely in a nice area in the greater Houston metro. Usually when you fall under that $250,000 to $300,000 a unit, you're going to either be in a super dodgy area, you're going to be dealing with something that's going to require a large renovation, or a combination of both. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be great opportunities in there. I've helped a bunch of people move into some TLC duplexes that are doing super well, and they're well on their way to building wealth at a faster pace. Fix those units up, increase rents on the tenants. They're living in one side. As they renovate that side, they're going to soon have 2 units that are renovated and performing. And so buying a little bit of a fixer upper isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just takes a different kind of personality type that's willing to live through the rough to see the riches on the other side. Another thing that you see in this market is once you get outside of that duplex range, a lot of the triplexes or quads aren't actually multiple bedroom units. I would say about 75% of those are 1 bed, 1 bath units. So I've had clients as recently as last week were looking for multifamily properties. It was her and her child, and they were looking for a main house that had a 2-bedroom unit, and the rest could be whatever. The difficulty that it was to find 2-bedroom units just for them so they could feel comfortable in the purchase that they need was crazy, with this being one of the top 5 largest cities in the US. It just doesn't come up very often. But to kind of show you what I mean, let's hop on the MLS and see what the multifamily market is doing here in Houston right now. First things first, just look at how few options that you have in one of the largest cities in the US. You only have 400 options, and all of those aren't actually in Houston. A lot of those that they're counting are way outside of Houston. And so another thing that you're gonna see is many of the multifamily properties are gonna kind of hug urban hubs and many of those areas that are in transition, because a lot of the deed restrictions in these areas are way more lax. You're not going to have a bunch of options out in your suburbs, out in your Cypress, out in your Katy, because the deed restrictions out in those areas are just way more strict and way more stringent. And so you're not going to have the ability to have multiple people living in and moving in and out of a location. Whereas in some of these more urban hubs of Houston, some of these areas where you're seeing a lot of these townhomes kind of come up around the city, and you know, your Sunnyside, your Fifth Wards, your Independence Heights, your Acres Homes, a lot of these places hugging the city, you're not really going to see that many options of multifamily not in some of these more urban hubs. And when you get into some of the more desirable locations, you're going to start to see that a lot of these are either, like I said, kind of mansion-y places up front, garage apartments in the back. It just is a little bit different than a traditional multifamily property that many people think when they're thinking of other areas like a Philadelphia or somewhere up in New Jersey, somewhere up northeast. And for example, this is a triplex. This is a 2-unit front house, and then there's a garage apartment around back. This is actually a gorgeous community. I love it. This is one of my favorite ones that I've ever toured. But this one is basically an identical duplex on the front house, and around back you have a garage apartment. But this is basically going to be what the setup is for many of the houses or multifamily houses in the city. If you're in a desirable location, you know, one that is, you know, walkable to restaurants or anywhere kind of hugging that Westheimer and that Montrose kind of area where a lot of people feel safe and want to be, it's going to be this basic layout where there's a old mansion that was basically cut up on the front house and something like a garage apartment or 2 in the back. And this is just a prime example of what that's going to be like. And many times people in the city in these more desirable locations will turn 1 or 2 of the units into a Airbnb, and they maybe keep the smaller garage apartment or vice versa. But that's the basic strategy of a lot of these type of homes in the city. But if that price point is a little bit too tough for you, as you kind of get to the outskirts and you get to some of these more newer build duplexes in the outskirts of the loop, you'll start to see very quickly that this is the style of home that you can get. And it can either be a upstairs, downstairs sort of duplex or a side-by-side sort of duplex, but you're seeing a lot of these duplexes pop up in the same areas that you're seeing these townhomes pop up. This is the style of home that you can find. and it's going to be a new construction, maybe side by side with you and a neighbor. But this is the kind of pretty house that you can get. But again, it's going to fall within that lines of $250,000 to $300,000 a unit. And so this one comes in at like right at $500,000. But this is a style of home. It's going to be super pretty. You're going to get multiple bedrooms. You're going to feel like you're in a luxury environment in this home. But your surrounding neighbors in the surrounding neighborhood that you see may be a little bit dodgy, because that's the trade-off of what you're getting for what you're paying in the greater Houston metro. As I adjust the criteria to just kind of show you what a lot of the quads look like, again, this is what I would consider an old mansion in the middle of the city. And these are just 4 1-bed, 1-bath units. So at some point in time, the previous owner of this home converted it, maybe put little kitchenettes in all of the units in the house, and now you have a 4-plex. But it's basically just a hodgepodge of an old house that was converted into a quad. And so if you know what type of investor you want to be, you got the funding squared away, and you understand the market, you have to now understand the challenges of getting multifamily. And one of the biggest challenges is understanding that this is an investment tool. This isn't a forever home sort of situation. And so you have to understand that this is a vehicle to make money and to set yourself up and your family up with multiple units to rent moving forward, building that wealth. The first challenge that we often see is the disconnect between what people think they should get for what they're paying for a multifamily property. And almost immediately, if the unit cost is under $250,000 to $300,000 in a prime location, you're going to be somewhere that's going to either be, again, dodgy or need a ton of work, or a combination of both. And many times the people that reach out to me looking for multifamily kind of want their cake and to eat it too. And unfortunately, in the greater Houston metro, that just isn't possible with how much normal real estate cost here in Houston. The average single family home sales price as of the recording of this video is somewhere between $415,000 and $420,000. And so if you can get multiple units for under that price, of course, we're going to be somewhere that's either a little bit dodgy or need a ton of work. The second challenge that comes up is when someone is trying to move with their family and they need multiple units. Is the breakout of multifamily property is not usually a big property where you have multiple units and all of those units have multiple bedrooms. You typically get that kind of environment where it was, like I showed you, an old mansion that was chopped up and now you've set up identical units on the first and second floor. That's typically where you would get the multi-room, multifamily options in the city. The third challenge that comes up in the greater Houston metro is that many times the seller won't even allow you to see the properties here without a letter of intent or some kind of contract being presented to them. And that's usually asking a lot for the average person to go in and buy a house damn near sight unseen, or to write an offer on a house sight unseen. When, if you're not familiar, but Houston has some of the best real estate photographers in the world. They are super catfishy, and I almost never recommend doing that on any level. And the fourth, and this is probably one of the biggest challenges, is that any of these multifamilies that look great, that have been priced great, that are in great locations, typically are tenant occupied with long-term leases, and that typically knocks you out of being able to own or occupy that unit. And so most of the opportunities that look really good, that aren't really busted, that are more turnkey, are typically being sold as a full-on investment opportunity where you have to come with the much higher capital and much more funding up front to be able to take that on. And so it's very rare to find one that is really nice, that gives you everything you need, that is also ready for you to actually be a live-in landlord in the greater Houston metro. And even though those challenges are present every time you're looking at multifamily, there are some triumphs that come once you actually get into a multifamily property here in Houston. The first triumph is that Houston is one of the most Airbnb friendly places in the US. And so if you can acquire a multifamily property, there's a high chance and a high likelihood that you'll be able to stabilize your income using multiple strategies at a property. It's not uncommon to live in one unit, have a long-term tenant giving you that consistent payment on one unit, and on the final unit to have an Airbnb where you have your high highs and maybe some low lows, but you're stabilizing it with the long-term tenant. That's one of the best strategies that I've seen for my clients that have bought Airbnb, multifamily type of properties. The second triumph is that rents have been strong here and have been increasing for like the last 10 straight years. And so if you have multiple units that you acquired and they were at a lower, maybe not as stabilized rent, as you renovate those units and turn over those units, the likelihood that you'll be able to raise your rents at a nice level to make it cash flow even more are much greater here in Houston. And so that's multifamily in a nutshell. If you can get approved to buy a house, a traditional single family house, you can get approved to buy a multifamily property. It's probably actually a little bit easier to finance a multifamily property. But there are some trials, there are some challenges, there are some things that you have to get used to with dealing with it in this market. And if you would like to have a deeper conversation, I would love to do so. My name is Aaron. I'm a real estate consultant, and every week I'm helping buyers relocate to and throughout the greater city of Houston and the surrounding suburbs. So if you need to know anything about where to eat, sleep, live, play, hit me up. I want to be your guy. It doesn't matter if you're a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 3 years out. Hit me up. I would love to be a resource to you. YouTube thinks that you should check this video out, so you should go ahead and do that right after this video. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have an amazing day.